And here we are. We're going to talk about parent guilt as a catalyst for change. Who hasn't felt guilty before being a parent? I'm here with Andrea from TikTok, Chepon2 on TikTok. Super excited to talk to Andrea like I am all the time. Andrea also is part of our team at No Violence for Kids Canada, has done a ton of organizing, some rallies in Toronto, stood outside in the -10-degree weather with signs to answer call to action 6 and repeal section 43 of the criminal code. Yeah, I remember that, Andrea. I remember your face and your nose was like bright red back in the winter while you did that. And also Andrea prints flyers. She also writes senators and MPs and does all the action that one person can do in order to end legal violent discipline against children in Canada. So talk about an inspiration. Also, like I said, Andrea is on TikTok, which I don't know a lot about TikTok, but I'm going to find out more from Andrea, I'm sure. So please follow Andrea. And I know she's making TikToks about children's rights, about parenting, and about all those good things. So you will see. I think I actually have some information on where to find Andrea on TikTok somewhere that I could scroll along, but maybe I don't. I know I just made it. Andrea at TikTok. Where'd that banner go? Anyway, it's gone. But follow Andrea at Chepon2 on TikTok. My name is Danielle Dion, and along with Cale Campbell, my dear friend, we have been working really hard to form an alliance, a coalition of Canadians to stand up and urge an answer from our government of all levels to answer call to action 6 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission inquiry, and that is to repeal section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada. And if anybody wants to know what code that is, that's the spanking law. So we are interested in ensuring that children's rights are protected on all levels, but also mostly probably in making sure that children are included, like all other Canadians, to have full protection from violence in the law. And like we know, children are the only citizens, including sailors, inmates, dogs, cats, and everything else in Canada, has legal protection from violence. So why don't kids? Probably look at my channel, scroll through my playlist. You will see all kinds of information on why not. Interviewed people from all over the world, Ireland, Australia, um, Israel, Germany. I've been talking to senators and researchers and authors and all folks trying to unpack this big topic on why the heck are kids still allowed to be hit by their parents, Andrea. But before we get started, it's super important to me. I take reconciliation very seriously. It's probably what I do in all my spare time is to understand more about how to make bridges happen and to take on my own responsibility as a Canadian. I am not, I fully recognize that I am white and my ancestors were white and came into this land and stole it. So, I'm doing the work that I can, and I'm not super great at it. It's messy, but I think that's what we have to do. I am here on the lands of the Kwantlen Nation, which is home to people. The actual Kwantlen means tireless runner. And when I found that out, I was just, okay, yeah, I don't run like on a track, but I'm pretty tireless in this mission. Um, and I don't want to claim those words as mine. I just also want to claim my gratitude for those words and for this land and for the rivers around me, which I also grew up and have many memories of fishing with my own parents. So that's where I'm at. And so we just started this new series, and it's going to be looking at different parenting topics and having discussions and chats. We encourage people to join in. You can make comments. I'm going to be watching the comments. You can also like and subscribe this video. I can't believe I said that because so many other people on YouTube say that, but I understand why. And so here we are. Andrea, we're going to go for it. Our topic tonight is parent guilt, a catalyst for change. Welcome, Andrea, to this channel.
Awesome. Absolutely. And I also would like to do a land acknowledgement. I'm on the traditional territory. I'm in Toronto, and I'm on the traditional territory of the Wendat peoples.
Oh,
And I am so grateful to be working and living on this land.
okay. So I think we could talk a lot about the differences in those traditions and cultures another time. I'd love to learn more about where you're at. And you're also working really hard on reconciliation over there. So you're in Toronto. I'm here in British Columbia on the coast. And we come together united in this mission. And in our talks, after all the work we do, we end up talking for hours about parenting.
We do. We do talk a lot about parenting.
Like a lot.
Yeah.
So, in one of our recent conversations, it was almost like we both noticed at the same time that guilt, it seems to be given a free pass. You know, so I thought we'd start out by talking about what sort of things in parenting make us feel guilty. Why do we feel guilty about these things? And then how can those things, or what experiences have you had that's been kind of a catalyst for you? So, what are some of the things that we feel guilty about in parenting?
I feel like just sort of for me personally, one of the things that I feel really guilty about is like the number one thing is yelling. This is something that I vowed to stop doing. I noticed it when my son was really young, that I would just get a little
Yeah.
like triggered, and it was a real catalyst. It brought back a lot of hard memories for me as a small child, also being yelled at. And I just, and guilt is a very powerful feeling for change. When
Yeah.
we feel guilty, we are able to internalize it and turn it into positive change. Unlike shame, where we internalize it and get smaller, but guilt is long, we can really use that for change. And I really believe that, especially, I have a lot of parent guilt. I'm not spending enough time with my kids, but
Mm.
the yelling is a big one for me. And I know the first time I kind of really raged out, it was a potty training moment. And yeah, I went into the room and there was just poop everywhere. And I knew he knew what to do, because we, we talked about it, and I would say, "Where does the poop go?" And he would point, but he was still learning. And walking into that bedroom after a nap and just seeing, and then he stepped in it.
We're
And I
talking about like a poopy guilt situation here now.
and I just and I don't know what happened. I got so mad because we had, it had been like 19 days of just me trying to get, the method and trying to get him. And I lost it. And I closed the door, and I just let out like the banshee scream that my
Mm.
neighbor ended up texting me, asking me if everything
Mhm.
was okay. And I in that moment I was like, something has to change. Like, all these memories came flooding back of, I mean, I didn't yell at my son. That,
Yeah.
I did do a banshee scream behind closed doors. Very obviously, he could hear me. My
Mhm.
neighbor heard me. And I just thought, that there has to be a better way. Like, this is not okay. I
Mhm.
scared him, and this is not what I want to be. I don't want to be this person scaring my
Right.
children. I don't want to be this person who is creating fear in them. Our attachment and our bond is the most important thing. And so surely we can use that to guide behavior
Yeah.
instead of fear and yelling and hitting, which, I definitely was spanked growing up. And, you know, I even am guilty having thoughts that I was going to spank my son when
Mm.
he was younger. I have never spanked him, but before I sort of started my journey, and now looking back, I have guilty feelings for even having those thoughts. Like, oh yes, if he's doing something really bad, yeah, I'll just spank him. I was spanked and
Mhm.
it turned out okay. didn't turn out okay. I have no emotion skills.
Mm. Well, so we're hearing guilt for yelling, guilt for thinking about some behavior that's not even happening. So like it's almost like preeminent guilt. And then you also talked about how guilt is more external, right? It's like something that comes out of you. Tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean by that?
Um, I guess I guess for me the difference like with the guilt is, you know, I'm open about and honest with myself about what I did and how I can do better. As a,
Mm,
you know, as opposed to, you know, something like shame where I just sort of internalize it and push it down and almost pretend that it didn't exist because the behavior was
right.
so bad, where guilt is like bringing it out in the open and acknowledging it and being okay with making mistakes.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say there is like there's an opportunity with guilt. And I know there's opportunities with shame too. And unpacking shame is probably one of the most important works of a lifetime that we can do because that's often deep seated and it is really important to look at because it changes our behavior and our thinking and it attacks us. It is a violent personal attack on our whole being. I think shame is, but guilt is more of about our actions in the moment, like a thing we did or our doing. It's more of our behavior that we're actually embarrassed by instead of like our internalized self. As far as shame, for me, when I think about my experiences as a mom, it's still happening. Like my kids are adults, and it wasn't very long ago where I broke down. You know, I think it was like just a couple weekends ago where I just crushed. You know, and in front of my kids. You know, and literally so embarrassed, and I felt so guilty because I'm like, here I am again. You know, they're adults; they don't need to wear this. You know, and I look back and, you know, as a being a teen mom, and I didn't have any, I don't feel like I had any skills. I feel like everything I did was in survival mode. And so because of that, I feel really guilty that there's a lot of things I don't remember, you know, because I just was so working two jobs or being busy or trying to manage conflict in my relationships or, you know, just not being good enough. And everything was just so on the fly. So I think for me too is there's a thing about feeling guilty about what we've also done in the past. It's not shame. It's more about like I feel really guilty about that. It's more like a regret attachment. Something about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah. So I'm kind of just thinking about that now. And when I think about parenting too, in you know, yelling, I think is super common. There's so many parents who yell, and I think that's really where we were going when we were talking about this, was about yelling and spanking. So recently on Facebook, on another page, some person who I don't want to name names or anything, and I know I follow their page, so I probably love them. And you know, I follow as many parenting pages as I can because I'm obsessed with it, and also because it's well, I'm obsessed with it. But there was a post that was made. It was one of those long, beautiful posts that sometimes I make on No Violence for Kids too. But it was like a post about, you know, how parents yell. It's okay. It's normal. And, just it's okay. And it was just to me when I read it, I got this feeling of like, no, it's not okay to yell at kids. Just because it's done a lot doesn't mean it's okay. That's all the whole bystander fallacy, right? Like just because something's done a lot or the majority doesn't, I can think of a lot of things that the majority does on the whole planet. That's not okay. So this whole bypass that parents give each other, it's okay. When the research actually shows that harsh parenting has a huge impact and a negative impact on mental health, on well-being, on the gray matter development in the brain, on the connection parent-child interaction, yelling is not okay. Yet we are the first ones when it comes to other parents yelling to give a free pass. for me, I'm finding that I'm trying to be really compassionate, and it's easy for me to do that because I get it, right? Like yelling sucks, and I understand it comes from, we're actually yelling at ourselves. We're not yelling at kids, we're yelling at ourselves because we can't handle a situation. So I want to send compassion, but at the same time, it's like, whoa, now what? Now you did it. If we just say it's okay and not acknowledge the harm, I wonder, are we more likely to do it again?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there when it is totally giving other parents a free pass, and I really think that standing up for ourselves and our beliefs and what we know in our hearts is right is not the easy thing to do. When you have, let's say, a teenager or a preteen, and you don't believe in giving them access to social media, but all of their friends have access to social media. Are you going to give them access, or aren't you going to give them access?
Yeah.
And I find that, I'm going to say no, and I have no problems saying no. I don't believe in giving my kid full access to screen time and social media. But when it comes to standing up about yelling, it's like, no, I don't think yelling is the right thing to do. And and taking that stance in person, if you hear a story, or even doing it on, so on social media. So
Yeah.
I also follow a lot of parenting groups as well. And I hear, and it's the exact same thing. You're absolutely right. It's like a lot of parents, the post is, I don't want to yell. And a lot of the comments are just, it's just, don't, it's okay. Don't feel so bad on yourself, and I think, there is an element of, if you do cross that line because you've been so triggered, it's super duper important, if you're going to say that line of, it's okay, it's not okay. But if you do cross that line, you need to repair that damage. You need to go in and you need to apologize, and you need to make sure that they are very aware that what happened was this side of the table, and that it had nothing to do with that child. But are they adding that piece of dialogue when it comes to saying it's okay? And I don't, and I they're not.
I hope some are, and I hope that, I think there is also a demographic of people that actually think it's okay, right? So there's that too.
But it's like yelling and punishing, and it's generations, which is why this repeal is so important. Because once we get this repeal, that is a definitive, statement from our government saying you can't use force for your children, and it forces them also to push more research and education into parenting, so we all can be educated on alternative behavior guidance strategies. And when it comes to yelling, this is the compassionate part too, right? Where it's like, it's not anybody's fault we're yellers. It's we are conditioned this way, coming from parenting, parental cycles where they were yelled. And I'm sure everybody has seen this meme that's kind of been going around, where it's like, the grandparent says you're stupid,
Right.
and then the parent says, do better, and then the next parent says, I love you, and it's like they have a blocker, right? And that's essentially what we're right. That's essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to break those cycles and to guide with love and patience and kindness, because it is possible, and when there's nothing like, I feel like when I don't have like, I'm learning as a 35-year-old woman how to deal with my emotions now, because I never was given the opportunity to feel my feelings as a small child, because all of my feelings were never okay. And so I'm learning how to feel my feelings and understand where they're coming from and why I'm feeling them, and then to make moves to use those emotions and those feelings in an advantageous way for me. And that is, change.
Mm-hmm.
And And one of those things is understanding, okay, I'm angry. Why am I angry? Where is this anger coming from? And when we reflect in this way, we can come up with a real plan
Mhm.
for ourselves to change our behavior. But if we're not reflecting and we're not coming up with a plan, there is no behavior change. And we're going to continue to yell and continue the same cycles of what is toxic generational parenting. And it's taken me, a few years to come to this conclusion, especially in regards to my own childhood. I lived a happy childhood. I actually from BC too, from Vancouver Island, the Senya. And, I was running in the woods and playing in the ocean. And I had, like having sleepovers and
Mhm.
but there's this part of me where it is sort of tainted with yelling and spanking and being shamed and blamed for what is very age appropriate behavior. And what I've come to understand through, I'm also studying to be an early childcare educator, is that this way of parenting and child rearing is toxic.
Mhm.
And it's taken a while for me to come to this conclusion because I used to think, oh, I was spanked and I turned out fine, but I'm not fine. I don't have these emotion skills, and I don't know how to set boundaries because I was always told to do the nice thing. And so I also,
Mhm.
I feel like, have a lot of guilt because as a parent, learning these things now for myself, the guilt lies in I wish I knew them already so I could
Oh,
be teaching them. But I'm like, I'm essentially learning these skills at the same time as I'm teaching them to my son.
such brave work. You're such a cycle breaker over there, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable when we talk. Just hearing what you're saying that, you were spanked and you're saying, I'm not okay. And also connecting like how yelling is important. That leads often is the precursor to physical discipline. And so, when we make a free pass for parents who yell, then we are opening a doorway to more violence. And so what you're doing by breaking the cycles and just addressing, your emotions, you're actually even a couple steps ahead of yelling. You're doing a lot to prevent violence and to break that cycle. And I can't imagine, you know, I wasn't even aware of any of this when I was, like there was this 20 years ago. This wasn't a thing. It was literally parent by the seat of your pants and kids should just listen and very a lot more traditional too. So like I was working and I had all these jobs, but at the same time I felt this over the guilt of having a job, of having two jobs. The guilt of not having dinner on the table every night was overwhelming for me. Like I look back on that and I think now when I think about like anxious feelings, it's the drive home because I worked in a school and the 3 o'clock drive home, picking up my daughter and then making dinner and making sure dinner was on the table and the house was clean and the kids were all ready and everything was fine. Like that. I feel like that's the seed of my anxiety is that guilt of not being a good mom back in the day. And what was a good mom back in the day was literally doing everything. And you're making these connections to now, and I just really just want to send a lot of compassion. And in a way, I was ignorant and I was blind. So there's that whole topic, right? It comes back again to blind ignorance and willful ignorance. So I guess in light of this conversation, we're seeing, there's lots of guilt in parenting and we give each other free passes. We need to be compassionate, but we recognize that the things we feel guilt about are usually from our own childhood and our own stuff. And that usually it's that behavior though, that I think we feel guilt because we know that can lead us in a more aggressive and violent situation. It's scary when we behave that way. And it's like we're out of control and it's so risky. What is your advice though? Because you just said to me earlier too, like it's possible to parent without force. It's possible not to use spanking. It's possible not to use yelling. And for somebody who's, been brought up that way and is so closely connected with their work right now, when you're in the moment and that guilt comes up, something's gone down, how do you not go deeper? What are some strategies that you can share?
I think the biggest strategies for me when it comes to parenting is understanding myself. That I think is because, I've been on a journey since the pandemic into the South, and I've been, I read a lot of Brene Brown books, who's amazing. If no one's read her. And I've just been on this really big journey of the South and coming to know who I am and what my boundaries are, and especially what triggers me. This is I think this is and then not, and so looking inward is the most, and this isn't easy, like you said, and I think a lot of people right now are in survival mode, where we have, with inflation and housing prices, and it's a hard time to be a human right now, I think, in our culture, in our society. And so the biggest thing I would say is you have to want to make a change, and it's not easy. Change is the hardest thing, but once you decide to make that change, you need to just look inward at yourself and sort of almost rediscover yourself, and think about what your triggers are. And then the next step is, once you know what your triggers are, is coming up with a plan. Without a plan, like I said before, there is no change. So, for me, when I'm feeling triggered, what I found helpful is, of course, those deep breathing breaths, because that just naturally will help our stress response when we're getting triggered. So deep breaths, and our language matters, and talking to ourselves. And this also is helpful for your lowering your stress response. So I have, sort of a handful of mantras,
like affirmations,
that I go through. My child isn't giving me a hard time. My child is having a hard time. Nice. This isn't an emergency. What's happening right now? Because our stress response is the response of an emergency, right? That's why our stress response exists. It's because we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and our physical self is being attacked. And even though we're social beings and these experiences are socially related, it doesn't change the physiological things that are happening in our body. So our language matters, and so we can talk to ourselves and talk us down from the ledge. This isn't an emergency. I have everything I need to handle this moment. My child needs me right now. And so I kind of go through a list of affirmations in tandem with my breathing. I need to step away and take a minute. Of course, I do that too. But I'm actually finding the one of the better tools that I've used is knowing what triggers me and anticipating that trigger. And
prevention.
And doing it exactly. So I have this really beautiful line that I love to use with my son, who's almost 4. And it's, do you need my help, or can you do it on your own? And so I love this line because it's kind of the illusion of choice. And it prevents me from entering the red zone. It prevents me from getting triggered. So I'll say something like, hey, it's time to turn the TV off. Not a choice. It's time to turn the TV off. Do you need my help, or can you do it on your own? And I wait, a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. And then I just come back calmly, coolly. Maybe I'm down on their level, and I'm just saying, hey, looks like you need my help. And then I'm taking that step and I'm turning it off right away. I'm not asking them 4 times. That's going to get me triggered.
Nice. Smart. That's good expectations. I love what you're saying there. There's so much juice in what you're saying. It's like a gold mine of information. I don't know where to take it all. I work with parents every day, all day, talking about different strategies. It's what I do. So what I'm hearing you talk about is self-empowerment. So affirmations, that's helpful for you. Connecting with your body and your breath, is so important because our actual physical self is in the moment, right? We forget that we have skin, we have bones, we have blood, we have nervous systems, we have a brain, we have toes, we have eyeballs, and our eyebrows are telling our environment all kinds of things too. So by recognizing where in your body you're having the experience can be so liberating. And then sending some love to your skin, like that trigger is alive in you because your mind and body had experiences and together, right? And when we're frustrated, we're separate from the mind and the body. So bringing back together. I love the deep breaths. I tend to go to when I'm triggered, and I haven't been around kids in so long. So I was just really just kind of reflecting on that when you were talking. And I do that when my parents, I'm speaking to them, and I always hold the children and I call them my Rebel Alliance, which is, fun because the kids usually are struggling with all kinds of behaviors. So all the kids in my world are my Rebel Alliance because I've got them, right? They might be a little bit naughty, but that's okay. They're saving the world. They're speaking up. So when I think about the Rebel Alliance in this beautiful light, I think about that they also have bodies. It's not just about emotions. And we get so caught up in that. And like, even in our guilt, like when I feel guilty, when I think about feeling guilty, it's literally a gut punch. Like it's in deep gut vomit, again, it's like, I feel really guilty. So like sending love to our body through breath, through wherever that is alive in us, I think is helpful. And then also just recognizing too, that it's one thing to give somebody else a free pass, right? Like, I think there has to be a balance. We're not saying that parents don't ever yell at their kids. We are saying, though, that we have a responsibility to break cycles. And that means to just do a little bit better so our kids don't have to spend as much money in therapy as we have, right?
That's cheap.
Well, it's expensive. I don't know. I've paid a lot of money for therapy, and so far so good. My kids have not spent as much as me, but I mean, maybe they're hiding it. So if we think about guilt as a catalyst for change, what can we do as a society, as a band of parents in solidarity? What can the government do, like, to no longer give a free pass for things that have been normalized? Yelling is violence. These are violent actions. So what can you say? Let's think about what we can say or think when we see another post on social media, or somebody saying, oh, all parents yell.
That's a tricky question. I mean, I feel like what can we do to stand up for children's rights in that moment, instead of continuing to normalize past generational cycles?
And we don't want to be yelling at people. Like,
yeah,
that's the whole idea, right? So we also have to lead with compassion and understanding. However, there is no free passes anymore. The violence is so normalized.
yeah, I think it could be a two-part stance. The one part stance is drawing attention how it's okay, everybody does it. It's like, well, you would never do that to your peers and your coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think drawing that similarity to, if you saw it happening at work, you would make a stand.
I hope so.
Say, oh, don't worry, boss, everybody yells at their employees, it's okay. You would
Totally cool,
right? So I think if we can draw that similarity, how we wouldn't be doing it to adults is one way.
Yeah.
And then I think something that really hammers home for me in terms of guiding my own behavior is just the simple knowledge that, monkey see, monkey do. They are watching me. They are watching me like a hawk when I don't think that they're watching me. And they are learning and they are absorbing everything I do. And like you said, I yell at them, they yell at other people.
Or
And
they yell back at you.
or I get, yeah, that's right, they yell back at me. So I think that's a real, I think that could be a catalyst
That's
for
a good
change.
point. So talking and saying, you know what, like I hear that yelling is common. I question why that's common. I don't question why, but we need to examine and be critical in that examination on why it's normal and why people say that it's okay to yell at kids. There's lots to talk about. There's lots of context under that. You like your one of your favorite topics, like childism, adult supremacy. Where does all that come from? And people might want to have conversations about that, but they might not. But it is important, I think, that we say and halt. Is it okay? Right? What more can we find out about? Is it okay? And also, I like what you're saying. When we yell at kids, are we okay as parents with sending them out into the world as yellers? Is that the way we're modeling peace and making this world a better place? And especially, like you mentioned, our society and our whole globe is under so much trauma and stress right now. What would be different if yelling wasn't normal? Would we be here right now? I mean, this is a pretty pivotal, I think, kind of behavior that has the impact on a whole society over generations and centuries, like we've been doing. It's been okay to yell at kids for as long as time, forever. Well, I know there's cultures, indigenous cultures, that would never have been okay, but yeah, so we could go there again. So again, why is that okay? And no, it's not. And research shows it's just not. Nobody feels good being yelled at. Nobody feels good being a yeller. It's not okay to model it. So
It's not
what?
that, it's not even those things either, but it's also the fact that no learning is happening.
Right.
Zero learning is happening when I'm yelling at someone. Because, and again, you can liken it to when I'm being yelled at. Am I giving two flying F's about the person who's yelling at me? Am I taking what they're saying? No, I'm probably thinking, oh, F you. I have better
Yeah, I
things
was
to
going to say you're giving one F. Yeah. You're giving
like,
one big F. Yeah.
right? So yelling
Yeah.
at me does, if anything, it's triggering my stress response. And
Mm-hmm.
again, when I'm in that stress response, I'm blocked off to my rational brain and I'm in my fight mode.
Your
you know
reaction. Yeah.
and that's so yelling serves zero purpose. And I think
Zero.
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 It's not okay. It's not okay because it serves zero purpose. So how can we do better? Because they're watching you, and we're sending them out as yellers. And again, we can be compassionate, for being, come down from generations of this way. And we can be compassionate in our response and say things like, just, if you do cross that line, like, you have to repair that relationship. You like repair that damage, because you've damaged it. Punishing, shaming, yelling, spanking, you are damaging the relationship you have with your child. You are damaging the relationship you have with anybody when you act this way. And if I act this way to a friend or a coworker, unless I don't like that person, I'm apologizing to them. So why
Totally.
is this not normal for children?
No, exactly. And I think you just hit it on the spot. All of these things are not okay. All of the things that you just named are lead intos of violence, right? And so it's not okay. And there's zero evidence that shows. And one thing that came up to me is one thing else that we can do in those moments, I think that's really quite compassionate, is validate. When somebody's yelling, that tells me that they're overwhelmed. It tells me that they're under a lot of stress, that they're hurting, or it might be, I don't know what emotion that is leading them to yell. There's a variety of options that could be under, but it's not fun. I don't know anybody that's yelling at their kids and having a good time. And if you are, then call me. I think we could, do like a 2-year intervention. And yeah, like, you seriously need help. So if you're yelling at your kids and enjoying that, it's not okay. But for the people that most people that are yelling aren't having fun. And I think validating, like when somebody says that they're yelling or they want to stop yelling, saying things like, oh, like what do you feel when you yell? Well, I feel poopy. Okay. So yeah, it sounds like that would be really hard to feel poopy. because people just really also, like, what I hear is that parents are yelling because they're giving clear direction. I mean, they want their kids to brush their teeth. They want, they're reasonable expectations. And so when we yell, it's almost like we're second guessing ourselves, like we're being, our expectations aren't fair. And I don't think that's happening. I think that parents are giving clear directions, or not maybe clear, but they're giving fair. They're asking their kids to do things that need to be done. And it's not getting done, and it's frustrating. Parents got their whole context of life going on behind them. So stress, like, it sounds like that's really stressful. Yeah. Once we get that, validate, because parents, it's not easy. And I wonder a lot about, instead of saying the free pass, saying, wow, are you yelling? There's lots going on. Like, it sounds like you need some help. Like, we need to get parents resources and help them understand that the things that are in the way are often not them. It's the systems of stress. They're tired, they're lack of resources, they're busy. All of the systems around family life makes it that parenting is super hard. And
That's right.
And I think
Not just the daily stressors of life that make parenting hard, but unless because these are learned skills.
Mhm.
We learn them from watching people behave appropriately, respectfully,
Yeah.
when we're younger. So it's not our fault we don't have these skills to take breaths, to not get triggered,
Mm.
to not feel where we're feeling without bursting out with emotion, because
Mhm.
these are learned skills. And it's validating feelings, I think, is super important,
And
because what
is it important to say, instead of the free pass, let's start validating the guilt, right? And once we can validate that we feel guilty, then it's okay to feel it. That's not the problem. It's good to feel guilty when we're yelling. I think that's a healthy response to that kind of harming behavior. And so then when you feel guilty, is to recognize the opportunity. Then when I feel guilty because of something I'm doing, what is it that I can do different? And I think that self-reflection, like you said, is important, because when we start thinking about ourselves and our own behavior, we release that tension and coercion between the parent and child, and it's more likely the child's going to be able to think more about themselves instead of resisting your, your fury on them. So I think that's really key, is validating, go inwards, acknowledge yourself, get close to your breath and your body. Um,
our feelings matter too.
I love that you said that. Humanize yourself again, right? Not object yourself to something, objectify yourself as a parent, because that's an object.
Yeah.
Right? You are a parent, you must do things that way. You are you, and you're a human being trying to do the best you can. Reflect. The more we reflect in that body, the more we're going to be aware of it when it comes up again. And I think you're onto something about prevention. So I think we agree. Guilt is a catalyst for change.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And when we're able to understand it, we can reduce coercive cycles and reduce risk of violence, higher violence.
Yeah. It's taking action, just like what we're doing with the No Violence for Kids Canada. I can make a change. I can take action. I can write those letters. I can go out there and get those signatures. I can get these petitions. I have the power to make change, even though I am one person. I am one person in a generations of abuse and toxic cycles, but I can be the change that I want to see. I
A
can.
hundred.
I can do it, and that knowing that and convincing myself by affirming that I can do it. I think is so important.
You're such a hope punk, and I love it. That's a new term I learned lately. I was listening to a podcast out of Change Seeds of Change out of the University of Victoria. They have a new podcast on activism, climate, and my professor sent me the podcast called Hope Punk. And so I'm stuck. And when I was listening to it, Andrea, your name came up in my mind. So this idea of self-agency and recognizing the power that we have and the decisions that we make. It isn't just about, it is a lot about, fixing the things we see wrong in the world. But in doing that, we liberate ourselves. Find your thing, find your power. And, that's kind of the Hope Punk idea, is the fact and recognizing that we're not going to give up because we're just one person, right? We have power within us to do that. And there's always an opportunity to stay. It's not just staying hopeful, it's staying hopeful for ourselves.
That's right. And I feel like even with child rearing, it's like, it's easy as the parent to say these things to our children. You can make change. You can be anything you want. You can do. But then we don't, I'm too old. I'm set in my ways. He's like, no, we are capable at any age, and especially as a parent, to model that behavior. When we model that behavior, our children become that behavior.
That was the wisdom of Andrea Chaffon, too, from TikTok, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled about this conversation today. And as you can see, we are so glad to go live, because Andrea and I will go back and forth for a good another 10 hours easily. So we will be back next Thursday. We're not sure of our topic yet, but we will be. And I also just want to let everybody know that I'm super grateful and honored to be an ambassador for the U.S. Alliance for Hitting Children. And coming up, we'll be doing some webinars with them. So I'm super excited about that work, to collaborate with them and Dr. George Holden, who is a hero. And I also do want to say that a lot of the conversations and the things that have been back in my mind lately have been Joan Durant's work with positive discipline in everyday life. That work and program is all over the world in humanitarian settings, and also so the foundations of that program are inspiring me to practice peace in all the things I do. And Dr. Joan Durant's work it just comes in waves in my world. And so please, anybody, her book, along with Dr. Valerie Michelson, is called Decolonizing Discipline. And it's an important series of essays, very much worth reading. I also do want to mention that if there's any organizations that you work for and any associations across Canada, please do go to CHEO Physical Punishment and endorse the joint statement. Over 660 other organizations across Canada and the globe have said that Canada that hitting kids hurts them. So I think that's it when it comes to all of my spiels. We're just happy to be here, and we really urge the Canadian government to get moving on Bill S-251 and what other bill?
C-273.
You got it. So 2023 repeal 43. Ready, Andrea?
2023.
Repeal
40. Okay. Repeal 43
in 2023.